Hi, everyone. I'm Ryadh from ClickHouse, and I'm very excited to be here today with a very interesting panel of guests that come from different backgrounds, but they do share something. They do share all of them share the excitement around, I guess, the model context protocol, and are actually running real use cases, which is a rare thing these days. I was reading Hacker News yesterday, actually, and I stumbled upon this comment from a user who said that MCP might be one of these few technology pieces where more articles have been written about than actual use cases being built. And I cannot say I disagree. It's one of these kind of hype technologies that we've seen waves of in the past. And in the middle of the hype, it's really hard to understand what are the real applications, what is the value that users are getting out of it versus all the opinions that exists out there. So that's why we assembled this panel today to dive a little bit deeper into it. Actually, we want to dive in a specific aspect, which is MCP at the intersection of real-time analytics. We don't feel authoritative to talk about MCP as a kind of generic wave. However, this overlap between real-time analytics and MCP is really interesting for us because we're hearing a lot of exciting stories from our users, and we are running some of these use cases at ClickHouse. So without further ado, let's do a quick round of intros. So please state your name, what you do, and one sentence on why you're excited to be here. Let's start with Yoko.
Hey, everyone, my name is Yoko. So my day job is a partner at a16z. So I lead early stage deals on AI infrastructure and anything developer tool related. But nights and weekends, I code out a lot of MCP servers. So recently built a Morse code MCP server that you can use to turn on and off your light. So you give the agents ability to send you Morse code through the light. So very excited about the technology and excited to chat more.
Thank you. Christian, if you want to go next.
Yeah, of course. Awesome. Yeah. Super excited to be here. Hey, everyone. My name is Christian. I work as an applied AI engineer at Anthropic. I'm based in the UK. My day-to-day is all about trying to squeeze the most out of Claude for our customers, both big and small. And obviously being at Anthropic, heavy on the MCP side. But I'm really excited about learning more on the real-time analytics, seeing the use cases you're facing with, and just sort of seeing the crossover there between what we do here at both the MCP side and also in my team, the Applied AI engineering team at Anthropic. So super happy to be here. Excited.
Thanks, Christian. Next, we have Alan.
Yeah, hey, everybody. I'm Alan. I'm the co-founder and CTO at Runreveal, where we help you answer the questions you have of your security logs and do detection or response on top of them as well. But I'm really excited to be here because MCP really feels like a tipping point in getting to the place where you see in sci-fi of talking to your computer. It's like a protocol that you can actually extract a lot of value out of. And I feel like we're about to see how things change for human computer interaction. So I'm very excited.
Thanks. And next we have Chris.
Yes. Hi, everybody. Excited to be here. My name is Chris Crane. I'm co-founder and head of product at FiveOneFour. We're the company behind Moose, which is an open source TypeScript and Python framework for building analytical backends on top of awesome technology like ClickHouse. And I'm really excited to be here because MCPs have been a huge unlock for us and for our users and customers. And I'm excited to share some of the learnings from that and learn from the impressive other group of folks on this panel. And maybe I can just throw it to Johanan, who's on my team.
Hi, I'm Johanan. You can call me George. I'm a product manager at FiveOneFour, and I'm building our AI products, which is so exciting. The reason I'm excited to be here is, I guess, the stories we're going to tell you about how we use this with our customers. It's absolutely remarkable. I'm really excited to share those stories.
And joining me from ClickHouse, we have Kaushik.
Hey everyone, I'm Kaushik. I head database integrations here at ClickHouse. Prior to ClickHouse, I co-founded DRDB. I also co-wrote the MCP ClickHouse server. I'm really excited to learn about how I can improve it and make it more useful for the folks here.
Right. And finally, Dmitry. Yeah, hi everybody. Super excited to be here. I'm Dmitry, and at ClickHouse, I'm running our internal data warehouse, internal analytics system. And actually, just a few months ago, I was a big AI skeptical person, I would say. I was not believing in AI at all. And then Kaushik just released his first version of the ClickHouse MCP server. And Ryadh showed me a very small demo, like he's talking to the database about some demo stock database. And at the same time, I realized I want this thing in my data warehouse that our sales team is using. And after 2 months, I'm like the biggest MCP evangelist, I would say, at ClickHouse, and I love it. Thanks, Dmitry. I think that's a great story. We've managed to convert Dmitry. Now we start to take on the world, I guess, next. So as a kind of icebreaker, I thought that might be fun to define MCP. Actually, the reason is I find it quite tricky to define. When I talk to users that had never seen it before, there's one main definition out there, which is like the USB-C of AI applications. While I like kind of the visual of it, it's actually not so precise and not really easy to then fit in the other concepts around that. So I'm curious if you have like one or two definitions that might be more useful. So who wants to take this one?
Before we get into the serious answers, I would say that we're probably still at the USB-A phase of things. I'm still flipping the cable 3 times before it plugs in. Each client still has its own way of dealing with things, like when you have no arguments or when they're dealing with pods, etc. So it's a good analogy, but it's I'm anticipating and excited for the time when it gets to the USB-C phase.
Yeah. But following the USB analogy, I kind of see it as a keyboard and a mouse for agents. So just giving them the ability to interpret and understand, and also like give feedback to the tools that they're working with, or get feedback from the tools that they're working with. And I think it just helps with control, you know?
Yeah, I think there's the definition and there's analogy. The definition is quite simple. It's just model context protocol. And then analogy, I will actually make an analogy to the APIs. So back in the days, one machine communicates with another machine was calling the APIs, which is like a common interface to get data. So MCP is like APIs, but for providing context to LLM. So APIs, a machine needs API data to function. LLMs need context to function.
Right. I guess that's a bunch of definitions we can add to the list of the ones out there, but it really helps, I guess, fix the ideas. One thing I was thinking about actually recently is that people might have really forgotten about this, but when Apple released the original iPhone in 2007, it was shipped with like a preset of apps that you could not extend at all. You get your camera, you get your mail, you get Safari, you get a clock, stocks. And we're still amazed like by all of these capabilities, I guess. And it was just 1 whole year later, I guess in July 2008, that they released the App Store, which was then shipped with 500 apps at lunchtime, which really then kind of created this kind of extensibility era, which I think a similar motion took place with LLMs and AI models when we had the ChatGPT moment, I guess, 2.5 years ago, when people were like, wow, this is great. I can do so many things. But then quickly start hitting the limitations. And MCP is not the App Store yet, but at least we see the light at the end of the tunnel. We see kind of a framework towards an App Store-like experience, a framework towards like extensibility of the LLM models and pluggability of these models into other workloads. So I don't know if it's completely valid, but I think we're going through a similar motion. At least we're laying down the tech foundation of it. And I don't know, maybe someone will find this useful when they share their MCP story. Finally, there's a lot of excitement, obviously, about this technology. If you open your favorite social network, there's a big chance that you stumble upon the post around MCP, whatever it is. And I'm curious about how do you interpret this excitement on your end, since you are on the producing and the receiving end of it. Any parallels with other things you saw in the past? Maybe Yoko, since you see a lot of these companies building around this technology, do you see that as just one of the other trends, or is it like more structural in a sense?
I think it's very interesting. So most of the trends out there in technology, the first adopters are always developers, especially if it's something technical. Initially, like back in the days for API, we had SOAP. I don't know if people here use SOAP. And then REST came in like a year later. But with the AI wave, it's just happening so much faster. And then it's very clear that there's a need in how to get agents, how we define that to communicate. And then in this case, agents are just defined as a multi-step chain. So in this case, the question becomes, if I were to build a product, what's the best way for me to plug into the ecosystem? What's the best way for me to stop, like building one tool by, tool by tool by tool and prompts by prompts? MCP is just a technical detail to enable that. It happens that there's gravity when it comes to, MCP clients, shipping the clients, and as a result, servers, come. So I actually do think there's a snowball effect there as more and more clients come, supporting more of the critical features like sampling, like resources, like prompts, which most of the clients there still do not support yet. I mean, we'll see more and more servers out there.
Yeah, thank you, Yoko. I think doubling what you said, I agree with the snowball analogy. So I think this is really happening. This is like growing by itself. But what I also feel is like, it seems like all the AI hype, all the AI market is so heated, and everyone understands that there is so many possibilities, so many options to apply the AI. And the world is changing right now, or like tomorrow, maybe in a few days. But there was no clear way to actually apply all this power to the real world, to other applications, to real actions, and to real data. And maybe people who were so enthusiastic about AI, they just saw this possibility in MCP. This is the way to easily apply all the value that we can get from AI to the real world. Maybe this is why people are so excited, and it was like a few hundred of MCP servers in just 1 month, I think. Maybe just because, finally, I can apply everything that I've read about and everything that I talked about with ChatGPT, for example, or Sonnet or other model to the real world, to my maps, to my trips, to my data, to my museum. Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam had an MCP server. So maybe this is one of the reasons.
Yeah, maybe I can just pile on that and say, like, I think what MCPs have really done is lowered the barrier to entry to participating in like delivering this amazing functionality that we've all been excited about for AI for a while now. And I think that's not surprising given the like historical trend that standardization actually unlocks and accelerates innovation. Because to go back to the USB example, if you were building a printer or a phone or whatever it is, or you want to build those, now suddenly you don't have to spend a bunch of time and resources figuring out the connection protocol part of it. You can just focus on building the best freaking printer in the world and like coming to market with your printer. And now whatever it is that you want to bring to market, you don't have to worry as much about the connection protocol side of it because you've got the MCP standard figured out for you. And a bunch of people are now suddenly piling in with all these cool, innovative solutions because that barrier to entry has been lowered by the MCP standard.
Yeah, I think going back to the REST API analogy, I don't know how many of you here wrote REST API servers V1, right? Like when I wrote mine with C++, it took me 4 days to get it working. With MCP, I was able to crack up MCP ClickHouse in like a few hours on a Sunday, right? So I think the tooling And expectations from developers have also evolved so much over the last 6 to 7 or even 10 years, right? Where when MCP came out, the tooling to write and the abstractions to write really complex MCP servers also came out, right? They happened at the same time. One thing I want to add to, like REST API versus MCP is that I view MCP more like a negotiation between the LLM and the tools that the server provides, whereas REST API to me seems more static in the sense that it's like, hit this endpoint to make this happen. I think that the newer models are also being trained to work with these tools better. And I think over time, the way the spec could also include streaming and push notifications to these LLMs. So I see the possibilities as being increasing and adoption being increasing over time. So I don't think it's like a very short-term hype, even though right now it might seem like a hype. I think the added capabilities will make it more and more like the foundation than a hype. Yeah.
That's actually very interesting because most of the implementations, especially on the client side right now, are just implementing a subset of the actual spec. And so I'm really curious to see what will happen when we get like clients that are like that support the full breadth of what MCP has to offer, and then what people will bring on the table with that.
I did want to give a shout out to Anthropic and to Kaushik here. They both did really cool product marketing things that made me so excited. The first one was Anthropic making the LLM guide to creating MCPs was fantastic. Like, I'm a product manager, not a developer. On one day, I was able to create a MCP that was able to use our CLI, which was just remarkable. Like, that changed literally everything about how we're doing AI at our company that day. And then I want to shout out Kaushik because like just the next day I tried out the ClickHouse MCP, connected it to one of our internal servers for product analytics, and started having a chat with our data. And that's when I knew we had to not only start using this internally, but start offering this to our clients. So it's very easy to get started. It's very easy to get infected with excitement because you see very quickly how it can apply to your real situations.
I see some hands raised. So maybe Alan, want to add something?
Yeah. I was just going to throw in again, we're using these analogies for like how they represent APIs, but like I was suggesting earlier, I think it's even a more fundamental shift than that. Just because we haven't really had an easy way for LLMs and AI to utilize other tools. I see it more as like when they added the first UI and the first mouse to computers, first Xerox, then Apple, way back in the 80s, as a way that people changed how they thought about computers entirely. And I know this is sounding like really grandiose and like kind of crazy, but the reality is, in order to get to the point where we can just like have a conversation with the computer and don't have to click around, we have to be able to expose all of this functionality to the model in a consistent way so that people can interact. So the protocol was just so important for getting that right. And I think they really nailed the simplicity of it. So
Folks cannot see, but we have a widget with a chat and folks are requesting Anthropic's take on this. So let's see.
Yeah, nice. I think for mine, it's been cool just to listen first. I feel like especially coming from Anthropic, a lot of what we hear internally is just banging on the drum. And I think in general, like, obviously we're big proponents of this. But at its core, it's nothing super novel, right? Like tools existed before, there's been specs in the past. I think the key here is that we've found an internal need of nailing down the separation of concerns between our teams. So you'd have like domain experts understanding their systems and their data the best, and then just being able to democratize how other people could just focus on their LLM application and just plug into that whenever they need it. And I think like at its key, like at its heart, I think everyone who's playing around with MCP servers. I, for one, built like a simple MCP server for my local gym this last weekend, hooked it up to my Google Calendar and just asked Claude to find which gym classes suited my calendar. All these things sound kind of gimmicky, but at its core, what's cool is that you're sort of offloading everything onto the intelligence of LLMs. So Claude in this case, OpenAI's offerings, Mistral's offerings, doesn't really matter. At its core, we're just democratizing what you can give access to context-wise. And I think what you see there is that we're kind of bullish on this being the building block for like actual more autonomous AI or agents taking place, because at the end of the day, you have all these different MCP servers hooking up into different systems and APIs, giving the functionality of an LLM to choose what tools are needed to solve a task, but having the intelligence to understand, well, how do you deal with 100, 200, 1,000 different MCP servers and their tools and their resources and their prompts. And that's what we're seeing now, where like, okay, there's a limit to how much you can do now. There's a limit to how much context you can give. There's a context window cap as well. I know we'll get into this later on. But I think what's super interesting is that by getting the community behind and sort of building this in an open source way, we're sort of seeing how we can go from maybe less of just thought of like, oh, this autonomous AI doing things, to something more practical. We're like, okay, I can focus on this MCP server, and then we can have Ryadh focusing on his, and then we can hook up together, and like you will have the intelligence of the LM to decide what to pull in and where. And I think that's where you sort of seeing this agentic stuff really take place, and people and sort of startups coming out of nowhere building these really cool applications just because they can really harness that sort of power of the community out there in connecting all this and focusing more on that LLM sort of app development rather than the sort of, annoying custom integration you have to build each and every single time to communicate with the source.
Great. Thanks, Christian. To make it a bit more, I guess, focused on like a subcategory of MCP, of MCP servers in this case, there's a repository called Awesome MCP servers out there. And I was browsing last day. It's really cool, actually. But I counted something like 30 plus categories of MCP servers. That's not even like the actual MCP server. These are like just the categories. So this thing is really catching steam and can virtually unlock any integration scheme. So you can talk to your data, you can talk to your gym, you can talk to your museum, you can talk to your friends. It's quite extensive from that sense. But focusing a bit on the category that allows you to talk to your database and why it matters. Maybe you can start with this question of like the context window limitations when it comes to analyzing data. So I guess the old way of doing it is to bring your data in some sort of like a file or CSV or JSON or something. You put it as an attachment in your client or in your project on Cloud Desktop as a context or something like that. And then you can start asking questions about it. But you'll hit real quick the context window limitations because that's like actual data points are using up some of your token credits there. You have to talk, you have to use to talk to your model. Another thing I found, at least for me, is like once you enable the LLM to formulate queries and then pass these queries onto your clients that actually runs them through the MCP server in an actual database that's actually designed for this specific use case, then you can get like summarized insights out of the raw data that are not using up much of your context window, but still like bringing in a lot of insights and context into the conversation you're having with the LLM. And then you talk about your observability data, your financials, your product analytics, no matter the application domain, you now are not limited with what you can ask the model. So this one, I think, is fairly interesting. Plus, couple that with like real-time data that's fresh, that's close to its production timestamp, I guess. That's what people really care about. And finally, SQL as a kind of bridge between what the LLM proposes and produces and what it gets out of the database. So a few thoughts about this. Who wants to go next?
Yeah, maybe I can jump in first. Maybe I was thinking I could let some of the more technical folks on the line give like the deep technical answer, but I want to also paint a bigger picture here, which is just that it's hard to overstate how massive of an unlock this is for the world of analytics. And this idea that you have these base LLM models that are trained on all of the world's and humanity's knowledge that are now at your fingertips, and you can bring to bear on whatever the specific like business challenge or business opportunity that you want to get insights from. And the only thing that you're limited on is the ability to give the model the right context and the right tools and capabilities at the right time to be able to bring that massive backlog of base knowledge to bear on your immediate problem. And I want to provide a real life example from one of our customers here to kind of maybe ground this in reality, which is we're working with one of the biggest telcos in the country, one of the biggest telcos in the world, actually. And we've helped them put an MCP on top of a couple of different sets of network topology and network operational data that they have about their core backbone network. And we were in a meeting a couple of weeks ago with some of their network engineering executives, and they started trying this out and just asking ad hoc questions on top of their networking data. And the first question they asked was, if we were to get a cut in our network, like from a natural disaster or a guy running around with a giant pair of scissors and cutting our network, like what would be the worst place that could happen? And the LLM like thinks for a couple seconds, and then it calls the MCP to query the data in the underlying database to get the specific context around that question. Thinks for a couple more seconds, and it provides an answer. And it's like X major metropolitan area at this connection point. And that all these like very senior engineers start nodding their heads and they're like, yeah, that's actually probably the right answer. And then they ask again, the next question is, if we were to add more connection points to a particular place in one of our rings, what would be the best place to do that to increase the resiliency of the network and increase the performance for end users? And again, the LLM thinks for a couple seconds, calls the MCP to get the underlying data and fill in the context, thinks for another couple seconds. And then it comes back with a plan of like, I would focus on this region, this specific ring, this connection point. And these network engineers literally start laughing because they're like, we started a major project within the company to do exactly that last week. And it took our network designers weeks and weeks of analysis to come to that conclusion, which the LLM just did in like 15 seconds before our eyes. So I don't know, it was really freaking cool. And it just starts to paint this picture of how you can unlock for even like executives or like business folks or even relatively not technical people who don't really understand the pain of data engineering and data analytics, like just how powerful of an opportunity this is that's at our fingertips to capture here.
Yeah, I'm happy to add one little sprinkle of technical flavor as the person who will build that, which was like managing context windows can be super difficult in doing this. Some of the data that we received, like one row of that data was larger than a context window. So it's not trivial to analyze. So we had to, generate a schema, then ingest it into ClickHouse, and then ask ClickHouse to be able to query samples of it, to be able to kind of do all of this project. So using this raw file sample method would not have worked. We had to resort to MCPs plus databases to get there. Sorry, Dmitry, I'll throw to you. Just wanted to add that, Dylan.
No, that's super cool. And yeah, I absolutely agree with Chris. This is the same what we see inside our company when people who were not using analytics just because they're not technical. For example, a salesperson that just onboarded 2 weeks ago, he doesn't know SQL and he really wants to get the data about his customers. MCP and an LLM just open this door for him. But two other interesting thoughts that I wanted to share. The first one is, so SQL as a language, as a programming language, was one of the purposes of inventing SQL was actually to create a more natural language, a more like human readable and human writable language, so people can actually talk to data. And it's interesting how LLM and MCP, they expanded thought further. So we actually now talking to data, but we don't even need to use SQL for this. So in some ways, this is like the SQL 2.0 maybe that actually reacts to you and helps you to ask the right questions. And the second thought that comes out from the first one is, and do we really need SQL now? So let's imagine we are like 10, 20 years ahead in the future. And it seems like it's all going to that the majority of users will be talking, the business users will be talking to database not through SQL, but through some kind of LLM, especially if we talk about 10 and more years ahead. And then if even in that case, the LLM will go to the database through SQL. Doesn't it mean that actually we're using a standard that was creating for people for machine-machine interaction? Maybe instead of using SQL, we need to think about more advanced interface, more advanced logic, and more specific machine-to-machine interaction for LLM to database interaction. And so knows what it can be. It can be a binary code, for example, because it should not be optimized for humans, because obviously SQL had some limitations because it's human readable. So this is something that I came just a few days ago, and I keep thinking about this and can't get out of my head this.
It's really interesting, but I want to note that we tried to kill SQL so many times over the last 20 years or something like that. So I'm more on the kind of skeptical side there. Maybe we still carry a form of SQL around. And yeah, it's one of these very resilient pieces of technology that always wakes up from the ashes and delivers, I guess, in that case. So let's see. So now jumping into the kind of main part of this discussion. Most of you basically have use cases running MCP servers for your users, which is a very particular position as a service provider. It's not just for yourself, but actually you do kind of serve these workloads, and you've been building and running MCP-powered use cases. So you have already access to some of the early insights, early adopters feedback there. So if we do like a quick round of these use cases, maybe starting with Alan and Runreveal, what have you learned by doing that?
Yeah, it's been pretty transformational for our users. So Runreveal, again, what we do is we help our customers answer the questions that they have of their security logs. So we're ingesting a lot of audit logs from various SaaS applications. They're usually quite structured, but we apply some normalization to optimize the query path on top of ClickHouse. And what we've realized is just like, when I implemented it, it was also on a Sunday. It was like, I ran the first like query against it, and I got chills at how good, like my hair stood up on end at how good it was at just being able to reason about the question and go back and forth with itself, pull out sample data from the data set. It would be able to look at a bunch of logs and figure out exactly what the fields are supposed to mean, either from its training corpus or from the context that it has looking at the logs themselves, and answer really complicated, very specific questions that you wouldn't really be able to, I mean, you could do it as an analyst, but like you have to craft like artisanal SQL for each step of the way, and it'll submit maybe 10, 20 SQL queries just to get to an answer. So a pretty concrete example of that is we asked it, what is the most dangerous actor in our network recently? And it did some analysis. It looked at the logs. It saw that there was a risk score associated with each like detection and alert. It determined that I was ultimately the riskiest actor in our network because we had just made a lot of marketing materials public for some marketing contractors that we were working with. And it saw that I made like 100 Google Drive images and assets public. And it was able to get to that conclusion without really any additional context besides what was in the database, the comments on the columns, and just being able to, submit multiple SQL queries and look at the data in the results. And like that was just incredible. And now our customers are depending on it basically every day to answer and discover like what's happening inside their internal corporate networks and their SaaS tools and everything. And previously, like without this kind of tool, you're either stuck using like some, a lot of security engineers like to use pipeline query languages because they're a little bit more human to read and a little bit easier to reason about, because SQL, like we were talking about SQL earlier, it's not quite the best language, but it evolved kind of naturally. But it's just really interesting to see how it's evolved and how our customers are using it. And it's now just like a critical dependency. And I don't think that there's going to be really any data intensive workload or application that doesn't integrate something like MCP or this kind of protocol in the future. It's just too table stakes now. And when you have something like that, it's just, it's going to, be really hard to turn around. The cat's out of the bag. So it's been really exciting to watch. And people are really discovering really interesting things that are happening in their network that they didn't know were happening before. So that's pretty cool.
And in terms of like reception from your users, do they like get it straight away, or is there like a learning curve? How much effort you put in just enabling the users?
Yeah, that's actually something that I realized pretty early on, is it's just dramatically reducing the learning curve to being able to investigate and analyze your security logs, where previously you had to kind of know like the schema that each SaaS provider exports. And sometimes that can get really complicated. Like GCP exports their schema, they like base64 encode protobuf, which is a binary format, into a JSON blob. And we do some normalization on that, to be clear. Like MCP isn't figuring out how to unbase64 that. We do that for our users. But like the point is the schema is really complex. And in order for a human to go and analyze that schema and understand what attributes and fields they need to pull out in order to query the data effectively, would take a significant amount of time. And the models and the LLMs really dramatically reduce the need to understand those like really kind of useless details in the end. Like as humans, we don't really care about the details as long as they're correct. So our users are able to ask all the questions that they had. Like we had these questions before, but it just like, we had to prioritize, like, is this worth actually investigating or not? And now like the prioritization is based on the results of what these queries are. And so it's actually changing people's roadmaps and how they think about what they're going to work on in security, which is pretty phenomenal.
Great. I think you touch on a very interesting point here, is this schema is a very valuable asset in that interaction, right? It's not just the data itself. And that's the big difference between throwing in like an unstructured data file or something like that and having access to a database where someone designed a schema, used expressive column names and maybe comments and primary keys and things like that. All of that is high value information for the model to figure out the query patterns, to figure out how to interpret the results and how to use, I guess, common knowledge from its training and join it with the specific knowledge of the query. Maybe we'll get back a bit more into that later with Dmitry, who did a lot of work for the data warehousing use case there. But before we go there, let's talk about the FiveOneFour use case a moment. So I don't know who wants to go next.
Yeah, I can jump in here. I wanted to quickly build on top of one thing Alan was answering though, because I think it's really interesting that like we're also seeing this really lowering the barrier to entry for anyone like doing analytics with their data, but it's also not 100% smooth yet. So like with the telco example I was sharing, before the executives could ask those questions, we kind of primed the chat conversation with a couple questions that like loaded up the right context window into that conversation. So the questions would be answered better. And I think I'm very curious to see, as this technology evolves, like, is the world just going to get comfortable enough with ChatGPT and Claude and these chat interfaces that everyone will have kind of basic AI conversational skills and prompt engineering skills, or how much of that will be kind of abstracted away by products and user experiences that get built out and honed within these clients? So that's just to say, like, there's still some rough edges there, but I'm very excited in the direction that's going. For our use cases, so I think one of the biggest learnings for us has been that there's kind of two stages to analytics work, or like categories of analytics work. There's the ad hoc analytics, where you're just trying to extract like one-off insights from your data. And then there's the productionizing analytics, where you're trying to turn one-off insights into like production grade data pipelines that can power repeatable reports, or secure, reliable answers where no matter which person asks the question on which day, they're going to get the same answer. And what's been really cool to see is that like the MCPs have a really obvious and I think like exciting and transparent application to the first one. It's like throw an MCP on top of your data and you can start doing ad hoc analytics. And that's what we've been seeing from day one. And you can get that up and running in like an hour. And it's really cool. What's been very interesting to see though, is that MCPs can also be very applicable to the second stage, where you're transitioning from like your chat client, from your chat application as your client to your IDE as your client. And it's the same MCP that can sit behind either one of those clients. And as you start building out the more data engineering core pieces that are going to power that insight and production, the MCPs can surface up context that's helpful in your coding and productionization environment as well, and really accelerate that. Especially if you've got the right level of abstractions that you're feeding to the LLM, and like the right frameworks that are sitting on top of the different parts of your infrastructure to let the LLM collect context from those and interact with those with kind of a reduced surface area. Maybe Joj, maybe you want to give some real life examples there, or build on top of that.
I'm happy to, or you can. I think a great example of exactly that was our work with a global gym franchise. So we worked with their data team for ages, but then we had a demo with the COO, and the COO in Claude Desktop immediately asked a question about a single user's user experience with their applications, because a complaint by that user had been raised up to the CEO. That CEO was able to ask a question about that person's natural name, which didn't match their user ID, and the LLM was able to deduce the match between the user's natural name and their username. It was able to provide all sorts of cool analytics in an ad hoc fashion. But then when we're starting to work with the data engineering team, we're able to kind of build some more scalable and rigorous stuff. So we explored how we could calculate heart rate zones using different heart rate calculations. And we were able to not only just explore how it could be done, but then we were able to implement using our MCPs. So I don't want to plug our software too much, but the MCP was able to create a data model and a transformation using our tool to then create a new data flow, which landed in ClickHouse, that represented this new calculation of heart rate models. This is the same organization. This is the same MCP tool set. And this is just two completely different users using two different interfaces to be able to do that kind of ad hoc analytics and productionization work. It's pretty exciting.
Great stuff. Actually, it was interesting is that what's common to your use cases is that there's still like a human being, basically. It's still triggered by someone, right? But we're not yet at the kind of autonomous agent era. We keep talking about it. And maybe, I don't know, Christian, since like you're working on like agentic workloads, I know at Anthropic around like cloud code and things like that. Is there anything that you see will have to evolve once we hand over the keys there to some sort of program instead of like someone triggering these workloads? Are you already thinking about these problems?
Yeah, I mean, great question. I think in general, if we take, for example, Cloud Code, which I think is probably our coolest sort of both MCP client and server. You can hook up like a GitHub MCP server to Cloud Code. You can go analyze PR comments and issues that you have and do a lot of heavy lifting code wise. There you have like it's very tightly coupled what the LLM is doing. So what we sort of call agents at Anthropic is usually just like an LLM in a loop. So we're like LLM with an environment in a loop. So in this case, it'll be a terminal, your code base, and then code. But then we're always there sort of interacting with it. We haven't really seen yet like production, enterprise ready workflows where there's agents to agents able to do things acting on people's behalf yet. I think the main thing is just like, it's kind of interesting. Like, we're in the frontier AI lab. Things are going so fast in terms of model releases. It's tricky just keeping afloat when it comes to everything we're doing, and definitely when it comes to our competitors as well. But when it comes to MCP, the protocol, there it's almost like a completely different approach you want to take. We want to move slowly, we want the whole community behind it, and want to make sure there's sort of a bunch of handshakes and sort of agreement on what's best for the protocol to really take shape. Because if we do something and we sort of hacky try to break it forward, and people are just going to lose interest and adoption is going to fall. And that sort of is a death spiral, because if we don't get sort of the community on board, then all this sort of, network effect of people building into it will diminish. But I think, long story short, a lot of like how we would do, like currently we support OAuth, where you can just like sort of give sort of your, give an agent or an LM your behalf to work for you, what you want to do. But all this is sort of always a human in the loop. I think we'll talk about this maybe a little later, but like the agent to agent protocol is kind of interesting, and how you can standardize the communication between agents more autonomously. But I think currently in April 2025, we're just not really fully there yet in terms of having something that is super demanding of a human in the loop. And in many ways, I think maybe it's not always a bad thing. I think it's good with this sort of steering how you want your agent to work, so to speak, because in many ways what you can see is that it sort of goes onto a trajectory and can't really get out of it. And so it gets stuck in a context loop that is like, okay, this is silly. I've just worked enough with LLMs to understand that this is something which is better to close down and restart. And I think so both like model capability wise, we need to get better, and also standardized wise, like how do we make sure this communication works in like a secure and safe way? And we're just not there yet. But I think we're moving in the right direction, and we just need a community with us as well. And that's why I think it's key that all this is open source. So people can raise their concerns regarding like, this isn't kosher or good, or like, we don't think this is a good way of doing it. It bubbles up and isn't sort of behind closed doors.
Right. Yeah. So I guess the adoption curve, the standing laws, there's like many kind of things that are at different paces building up here. So we do have an internal use case as well at ClickHouse that Dmitry runs around exposing our internal data warehouse through chatbot experience. Dmitry, any feedback about this use case you want to share with the team?
Yeah, basically, maybe I'm running a little bit ahead. I know that we have this topic in our agenda, but I need to mention it here. I think of the current version of the MCP as of an MPP actually. So I can bet that in 1-2 years, we will not be using the same version of MCP anymore. There will be something absolutely new. And this is completely fine. We are building something on the current version. There are some restrictions, there are some limitations, but its MVP and its purpose is to show the value, and the value is huge. The simple fact that we are talking about this and we all have our own applications and it works in so different scenarios, this shows everything. But if we get back a little bit to analogies, I would say that currently I think of MCP as of like some kind of Python functions, some kind of standardized programming language functions that can be used inside your program. And in 1-2 years, what we actually should have, and I think we'll come there based on the work that Anthropic's team is doing on the remote MCP. This is also public. I hope I don't disclose any sensitive information yet, but we should see something more like HTTP protocol, very lightweighted in terms of establishing the connection, no client part. So there should be no server that you need to install, run, etc. It should be a standardized API that the model can call. And what personally I really want to see, and this will help us a lot actually, is calling the MCP server not on the client side, but on the model side. Because currently, as for example, Chris mentioned, you need to install Claude, then you need to install MCP server, and Claude is the entity that will go to the MCP server, not the subnet model that is hosted on the server. So this is something that restricts the usability a lot, and I hope this will change. And in general, all the limitations that I can mention a lot of them. It's both the security that we already discussed. It's, for example, no user push downs from the multi-user UI, because if we talk about Claude, it's a single UI project. It's a single UI app. You work with it as a single user. But in ClickHouse, we use LibreChat UI, which is the multi-user environment. So everyone can log into this UI and run their LLM queries, and the LLM will spin up MCP servers. But MCP server will go to the database under a single database username. So database knows nothing about the actual user who is working with the UI, who is talking to the LLM, and there is no place in the protocol, as far as I understand, to mention this. And there are a lot of such limitations, but I'm fine with them until we think of current version as of MVP, and we know that this will change completely in the next year.
Interesting. And can you just basically dive a little bit more into what it takes to productionize basically a use case like the one you productionized at ClickHouse? Besides like plugging in the tools, making sure everything talks to everything and is secure over the network, like your IT kind of project part. I know you've done a lot of work on the data model, on the dictionaries, on the context, and sanitizing the system prompts and things like that that might not be obvious to everyone. Can you just dig a bit more on that?
Yeah. So basically, you named it. The biggest thing that we discovered is you never can give enough context. The more context you give, the better the model works. And by context, I don't mean simply describing your data, like, hey, this field is named revenue. This is revenue of our company. This doesn't work. So you need to describe not the data, but the business processes that lay behind the data. So if it's revenue, what types of clients generate revenue, how these types of client can migrate from one type to another, what extreme situations there can be. So in general, the more you describe to the model, the better. And the only big limitation is actually the context window. This is what we're facing a lot now. We discussed it with the Anthropic team. There is no way to enlarge it. We're looking forward to the multi-agent environment for this, to agent mesh. We also experiment with so-called agent chain. This is not agent mesh, unfortunately. This is when one agent can call another, and the second agent actually knows the result of the first one, but they cannot talk to each other, unfortunately. This doesn't work at all for us. So we're really waiting for the true agent mesh to, first of all, to deal with the context window limitation. So this is regarding the context. The second one is taking into account that humans are humans, unfortunately. And for example, recently we completely broke our LLM environment. Previously, we were describing customer entity, and we were not pointing to the word customer itself. It's hard to explain, but you will understand in just a second. But recently, we actually gave our LLM access to one more table, which were hosted, which is hosting client, ClickHouse client information, which programming language clients are using our users to access the ClickHouse database, like Python library, Go library, etc. And what LLM started to think is when customer is asking for, show me all clients in this region, for example, instead of showing the customers in a specific region, it started to use to show the actual programming language client. And it's human who is wrong, because client is client and customer is customer. But you cannot say that, hey, you are doing it wrong. You cannot talk to LLM like this, because humans want to talk to LLM like they're used to, and used to talk to other humans. And because of this, you always need to keep in mind what can go wrong, what a human can actually do wrong in this very simple task. So this is the second one. And because of this, we have an instruction, a base instruction for our agent, something like around 10 pages of a standard size letters. Like this is really huge, just trying to catch every corner case. Unfortunately, this is the truth.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And that really shows a bit, basically the human effort you need to put in to make sure this application perform at an acceptable level of performance, I guess. And finally, closing the loop on kind of real world applications. Yoko, you've been implementing a lot of different types of MCP servers that are actually different a bit from the ones we described earlier that are like pure data driven. So I think this perspective is also maybe unique in that sense because it will show like that applied to different domains, you might be facing completely different challenges there. So any insights you might have to share with us?
Yeah, I think on a very high level, there are two kinds of MCP real world use cases. One is you use MCP as a developer. We add MCP to the cursor or cloud desktop of the world. The other kind is applications that actually integrate MCP servers, but do not tell the end users it's MCP because it doesn't matter if it's MCP or it's integration, it's API, it's just a technical detail. So one example of that is actually there's like apps out there like that allow you to have an agent locally, like add Notion, bring up Notion, generate tags. That's powered by MCP, but the end users are not technical, so they don't care if it's MCP. So for the first category, which is more developer-driven workflows, I see a lot of local first workflow. About like 80-90% of real use cases I see today are, local first. So hopefully Anthropic will release something like with registry, remote MCP, like official way to do that. That would unlock the next step. But today, most of the use cases are like debugging, searching things, checking with logs. There's also support workflows. That's actually very prevalent in internal use cases. Like here's a task ID. I want to check what happened to that task from my cloud desktop or cursor, almost like an internal tool. So that's what I've seen.
Because we focus a lot on servers, I guess, in this discussion, do you see also innovation happening on the client side? Because I mean, there's, as I said, like 30 categories of servers on that repository I mentioned earlier. It may be like a handful of clients that are listed there. And anything you are seeing like emerging in that space?
Yeah, so it's kind of by design based on the protocol that there would be more servers than clients because they really shut into all the complexities to the client. The client needs to discover like which tools to use and needs to handle different ways of interacting with the context. So naturally we see less client. And then by extension, today, most of the clients out there are either terminals or, like published by labs like OpenAI and Anthropic, or like coding agents. I think there will be kinds of client that comes out for more creativity workflows. Like it's really hard to imagine to use like Cloud Desktop or Figma, although I love Cloud Desktop, it's just not a design tool. So the client experience really dictates what kind of end user experience will be, no matter what server you can plug into. So you can definitely imagine, next Canva, again, like would the server generate Bezier curves and send that back? How do you display that? So the display and the UX on the client side will be the key, but it will take a while before, they come up.
I feel like clients came here before MCP even came. Yeah. What I mean is like if you look at tools like ADEPS, chat or something like this, right? Like they would summarize and chain LLM calls by themselves without ever having to invoke MCP, right? So I think client innovation happened and it was happening in a very fragmented way. And I think MCP kind of standardized a lot of this and took away the burden of, like custom summarization logic or like embedding things and then calling them into again from client side, right? So I think client innovation started, server innovation, MCP came in and it kind of like blew up.
We'd love to see what's Christian's view from Anthropic. Like, what have you guys seen? You guys probably see way more servers and clients than the rest of us do.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my end, I can probably echo what's been said here. In general, like to begin with as well, like we were one of the first ones to support MCP servers as like a LLM provider. Obviously, we sort of started the whole open source MCP protocol to begin with. But what we've seen the last couple of weeks is that OpenAI, Gemini, they're backing this as well in giving their desktop services support for MCP, which is great. I think this is again one of our claims of like race to the top, which we call call it internally as a mechanism that we want to sort of, in many ways, force others in this space to embrace as well, because democratizing that information, giving the context LLMs, doesn't necessarily, I mean, MCP itself isn't something that Anthropic will gain from, right? It's nothing proprietary to us. But what is useful is that it sort of unlocks everyone else who has their own domain experts that want to connect with anyone else to do so. So it's really a portal for that. So we're really happy that the other industry giants are sort of jumping on this. But in general, as you mentioned, a lot of the complexity falls on the client side of dealing with these MCP servers. So I think we're seeing a great amount of servers being spawned. The client side, not so much, mainly because you need to, like, depending on who you are, if you're an engineer, you probably gravitate to an IDE, and that really is supported for you. So the context you want to bring in is maybe more interesting. So building a server is more an interesting task there. Same thing if you're maybe more a business person, then you already have your desktop client. And if you connect that, you can solve your tasks by just getting that context into the MCP client to begin with, and then also solving your tasks from there. To be fair, though, we are seeing a little bit of an interesting space from designers. So you mentioned Canva, for example. I think we're seeing more sort of relevant aspects of what they're doing for another subset of professionals. It's not only like people who just want a chat interface or an IDE, but something else more creative. And I think that's where we're going to see quite a cool space where we are more in the background. We will power the intelligence, but this sort of creative space of understanding where to meet people is where you'll see a lot more growth. Even small things like there's a startup in Stockholm called Lovable. They're doing this no code app generation stuff. And what's cool there is that a lot of what they're powering right under the hood is a lot of MCP servers being connected. Now, I don't know if they're actually doing this or not. They might have their own custom integrations, but at its core, if you want to connect sort of a Stripe API to your website and do all these things under the hood, they are sort of, conglomerating that into one packaging, which is their service. And I think you'll see sort of a cool nuance, but it's more, there's more sort of complexity needed from the client side, of course.
Great perspective. Thank you. And yeah, maybe it's time for closing remarks, and we can maybe start with, I guess, the more negative ones and then finish on the more positive ones. So in terms of limitations, I want to pause 1 second on like maybe 2 main areas. There was a blog post a few weeks ago called the S in MCP stands for security, which is like an interesting fun there. And I guess we have a security company with us today. Any perspectives on security model there? And then finally, after that, and it's what takes, if anyone else wants to take it, it's around like, how do you deal with trust and hallucinations and the classic kind of AI challenges in terms of adoption? Alan, go first.
Yeah, we've been thinking about this a lot, obviously. While it's still a very powerful tool, there's still like a lot of gotchas that you have to watch out for. There's namespace collisions on the tools, so you don't necessarily know what you're going to get. Obviously, there's like code execution risks or prompt injection risks. So I think like right now, people kind of have to lean on the client to implement proper security protocols, but also treat like the MCP servers that you're adding as basically like a library or something that can control your whole computer, because you don't necessarily know what you're getting when you add it unless you've reviewed the code very thoroughly. But I think as we expand on things, it took years for operating systems and mobile applications to develop permissions and capabilities frameworks. But obviously, like, it's so front of mind for people. There's so much momentum here. I think it's going to happen more quickly, but that's a huge necessity when building the model context protocol at a high level. But that said, I think still, to everybody else's point, a lot is going to fall on the client for just basically representing the identity of the person controlling it and giving the client permission to do things both like as you go. But I'm pretty optimistic about that story being solved, and I'm kind of thankful that everything falls on the client today, because from a security risk perspective, it's a lot easier to reason about if you know that the client has the identity of the user calling the client. So that's kind of how we think about it today.
Very interesting. And yeah, finally, when it comes to data and generating like, I don't know, financial reports or all sorts of like interesting insights people are looking for, there's always the risk of getting plausible false results out of the model with hallucinations. Any tips, besides like giving more context, obviously, anything you found useful in your use cases, also dealing with the learning curve of your users with this problem?
I have a brief opinion here, which is MCPs have actually increased our validity and increased the trust that our clients can place in the analysis provided by LLMs in kind of two main ways. The first way is that the MCPs, especially the ones that they use that we built, allow them to build artifacts which give some sort of evidence as to the analysis that they did. So it'll build a data pipeline or it'll build a data model, so you can now understand the provenance of that analytical decision that they made. So that is not something that we used to have as readily available. The other element is most of our tool calls show the data from the source system. So anyone with some knowledge of the data can start to check against the hallucinations, check against the answers for hallucinations really, really easily. I do want to quickly mention that there is one other limitation that maybe we should talk about, which is the ability to call the right tool, like how much the LLMs drop off in performance when you get to above 10 or 15 tools that you have. I saw that Kaushik and Dmitry both raised their hands in response to what I said, so they can answer, but I think we should chat briefly about choosing the right tools as well.
Sorry, me raising the hand was in regards to the comment that Ryadh made earlier about how to ground the results. Right?
Mm-hmm.
For me, one thing that I found useful in coding, at least, is closing the loop, right? Where if the LLM can invoke some script to run the tests and validate that the changes that it did by having links and formatting guidelines and tools like this, right? Like it closes the loop and gives you more confidence in the changes made. So my first thought was, hey, is there a way we can hook it up to our accounting system in which it can push its results to and get a check mark saying, hey, all checks and balances have been checked and like things are looking good, right? So I feel like that's one good technique if we can kind of incorporate the loop closures into the calls that you make. Yeah.
Great. That's very interesting. And then finally, to close on like the future and perspectives, it's a really open question here. Is there anything you're looking for in particular in that sense? I guess we have a lot of requests for you, Christian, but any topic, any theme in particular you want to see implemented in MCP and in the way, I guess, we use it or we distribute it or we implement it? Chris?
Yeah, I can share some learnings that's like coming from our actual users, like trying to do this at scale. And I think what I'd want to share is that if you are not using AI or MCPs for AI analytics yet internally, I want to emphasize like it's probably way easier than you think. You can probably get there in like an afternoon of hacking and setting up some people on your team with Claude Desktop and get the MCP going and get them like asking questions, natural language questions of their data and getting cool insights. On the flip side, if what you want to do is expose AI powered natural language analytics to your end users, it's probably a lot harder than you think right now. And there's a lot of limitations that we've talked about around security, around authentication, around data segmentation, and then that all on the back end. And then on the front end around the actual client experience, where like a lot of our customers are looking at like, how do we build natural AI chat into our own application? And like, how do we get that white labeled in there? What does that experience look like? And it's a non-negligible lift right now. And what I'm really looking forward to in the future, or kind of curious to see how this plays out, is if it plays out in kind of a standardization on a client. So what I mean is like, to reason by analogy, with the initial wave of the internet and the World Wide Web, it was like every company built their own website and that was the primary way you interacted with that company. Now what we see is that you've got
specialized channels for specialized use cases. So like every company has their own Instagram page, and like the Instagram page is the primary way that consumers interact with that. And Instagram is dominant. And I don't, there's probably other apps that the kids are using these days that I'm too old to know about. But like what I'm kind of hoping we see is a consolidation on these clients, likely around specific jobs to be done or domains, as Yoko was saying, like, you know, whether it's design or analytics. And then you get like your marketplace of MCPs and apps in there where you just one click and like users know, I go to this channel to do analytics, and then every company is not having to reinvent the wheel. And I think that would be a very cool future to get to, and I hope we're not too far.
I think maybe I can just chime in on one thing. In general, like, I think this conversation has been super cool just to get all different sort of aspects and insights into, especially how you guys have been dealing with MCP servers. I think from my case, one thing I'm very bullish on is, I mean, again, we've spoken this many times, there's just a plethora of different MCP servers, all the concerns about, you know, how do you make sure there's no malicious actors with bad intent. I think all that there's going to be some nuances that need to be ironed out as time passes, but I'm really excited about the day where you can just sort of almost like overwhelm LLMs with just what you're throwing at it, and they're able to just parse through it. So A, context window wise, but B, also just having again, like the separation of concerns. Like, I don't need to deal with the fact that, oh, is there an overlap with what I'm actually, the MCP server I'm hooking up to my top desktop with what it already has access to. And I think those kind of questions of like, how do I need to deal with this sort of nitty gritty details where the LLMs today are just not good enough. So simply put, like, you know, up to a handful of tools, 10, 20, 30 tools, or even more, where you're like, okay, I'm not going to fully rely on the output from here because I know this is the limitations of it. I think those parts are going to be very exciting, where we can just sort of continue trailblazing on how relying on LLMs to have this sort of intelligence capabilities of acting right at the right time. A lot of that comes from the RL we're doing in post-training, but where we can focus more on, and we as like MCP server developers, is how do I best just give that context in a way where I can just like almost plug and play. I think ideally, again, it's maybe preaching to the choir, but really getting to a point where you don't have to worry about like, oh, I have to remove this MCP server to get this one in because there's too much going on at the same time and performance degrades. I think that part I'd love to just iron out and just throw more at Claude. So I can sort of solve my task rather to care about the sort of situation it's in.
Right. Great insights, everyone. So we're already over time, but I guess it was worth it because the conversation was quite interesting, at least for me, from where I stand. I've learned many things, despite the fact that I try to follow this field fairly closely. There's always new things and there's always new perspectives. I tend to agree with Yoko, where like maybe in the future, MCP will be an implementation detail for most of the users and will be like behind the scene powering these apps. But right now, since we are in the kind of inception phase, it's the kind of 3 letters acronym that everyone is using to refer to this specific interaction model. I'm really excited about the time where it will just happen in your favorite app and you just won't notice it. I guess that's how global adoption look like usually. Thanks everyone for making the time for the conversation today. It was really interesting, and hope to see you again soon.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.